So studying how the pandemic has affected both peer review and the conduct and dissemination of science is actually very important in particular, so that we can learn from these experiences, and that if there have been successes, that we actually maintain these successes beyond the pandemic, or that we design better interventions than the one that we've used to try to mitigate the challenges. And importantly, that we continue to be watchful for new forms of biases that may have become evident. So we will welcome such studies that can inform these lessons going forward. In the few minutes I have, I'm going to set the stage by describing the challenges that we've observed and hopefully highlighting a few potential topics of interest that would be considered. Obviously, it's not going to be exhaustive. As Annette said, you will be driving the agenda, but I'm going to focus on these two topics, and starting with how the pandemic has challenged peer review efficiency and effectiveness. So shortly after the outbreak of the epidemic, many publishers have seen a very strong influx of submissions of COVID-19 research. And that created a very strong tension because on one end, obviously everyone was very conscious and recognized that speed was of essence. It was very important for publishers to rapidly peer review, vet, and disseminate this research so that it could inform care and interventions. But on the other hand, there was a huge volume, and many publishers have attested to the fact that the quality was really mixed. And that may have been because people were shifting and pivoting their research programs to COVID-19 with very little previous experience, or simply because the doing research in these conditions was extremely challenging. And so meanwhile, the experts that our systems typically rely upon to vet the quality of research, these experts or peer reviewers and editors were experiencing the exact same reality. Many of them rightly and understandably focused on research and clinical care, and those who were available actually became overwhelmed really quickly, and that put a real stress on the system. So there've been some creative interventions. I'm mentioning just one for illustrative purposes here. But I think it would be very important to understand how this tension has affected the record quality, what interventions were effective, and is there evidence that we've learned there that we can actually introduce to maintain efficiencies beyond the pandemic. Obviously, the challenges were not limited to COVID-19 research. Across the spectrum of scientific disciplines, researchers experience really practical limitations with lab in lockdowns, field studies interrupted, clinical trials on pause. All of these demanded adjustments and interventions. And again, a couple of interventions are mentioned on the right-hand side here for illustration. And also, you know, in terms of availability of reviewers and editors, even those who weren't working on COVID-19 really had many other demands on their end, right? I mean, a lot of people had to shift to online teaching, for example. So all of that affected the availability of expertise in the system. And then, regardless of their roles in the process, author, reviewers, editors, even professional editors, many scientists and experts were actually also caregivers. They were tending to the needs of sick family members, they were homeschooling children, and that has exacerbated some biases that already exist in the system. And for example, there have been reports that have highlighted that the pandemic has disproportionately affected women in science and engineering. So it will be important to understand these biases, to understand whether there are new biases, and to really design intervention to control them. Moving on to the second topic of how research is conducted and output shared, I'm just going to draw up two themes here. The first one is the dissemination of before peer review. And we've seen during the pandemic an explosion of use of preprint servers in biology and medicine, which had not been seen before. It certainly has had positive impact via the rapid, unrestricted dissemination of research findings, but it's caused some challenges for communication to the public via the press, for example. It's had implication on policy making. And then we've seen amazing examples of the community, either through an organized system or spontaneously coming together to peer review preprints. On the other side, on collaboration and sharing, funders and many institutions, other organizations called early on for sharing of research data, for example. And certainly, we've seen examples of research that has been accelerated tremendously through international collaboration, open sharing of reagents, data, code, protocols. But we've also seen evidence that there is actually quite low compliance with data sharing requests. And there's been examples of data from critical studies that was not available and compromised evaluation and trust. We've all seen examples and anecdotes of that. And I really hope that at the peer review Congress, we will see robust evidence analyses of these effects, whether they're positive or negative, so that we can really inform the future of how research is disseminated in pandemics, but also beyond that.